Hello, everyone. I had, a lot of you know, I spent a month in Salerno. I came back on March 23rd, and my trip wasn't strictly a vacation, and it definitely wasn't tourism. I've been to Italy so many times, and while there are things I'd still like to see, it wasn't my primary focus and that was fine because the weather was really not too good the first couple of weeks I was there. I actually It was actually pretty miserable. I wouldn't have wanted to go to some of the archaeological sites in the rain, but my main focus was to try and find some cousins of mine that I knew about but had never met, and to try and find out a little bit more about my father's family, which originates in the province of Salerno. And I did that. Um, I had been looking for my cousin Nicola for a few years, and I didn't realize he had changed jobs. I'm not going to go into details about what he does, but um, I had I found the email of the organization he worked for previously, and somebody there was kind enough to forward my email because he actually has changed and now works in Rome. And he got the email, and he contacted me maybe 2 days before I left Israel. But it was enough time for me to um, contact him, and it was like we had known each other all our lives. He is about 13 years younger than I am, but it doesn't matter. I mean, at our ages, what's 13 years? But the thing is, there was just a real connection. And he has a sister who I didn't get to meet, but I talked to on the phone when I was in Salerno. She lives in Naples, and we've been corresponding by email. And I wish I had been able to meet her, but she still works, and her schedule didn't permit us to meet at a good time. So hopefully, I'll be able to make another trip and meet her. But the important thing was my father was born in the Comune di Montano Antiglia, which is a small town up in the mountains. My family was the baronial family, and in Italy, that can mean a lot of things. But 400 years ago, they actually had been granted a feudal estate. I'm not sure who the grantor was, but the title of barone was an actual noble title. In Italy, I think it was a bit more recently, maybe since the abolition of feudalism, um, a barone could be many different things, including somebody who was a prosperous merchant and had been recognized in his city or whatever, and was given the title as an honorific. But in our case, it was an actual um, granted noble title. So the house is still there. Now, I had seen it when I was 12 years old, and I had very vivid memories of it. It seems a little different now. So I don't know. That's a trick memory can play on you. Or maybe the person who took my mother and me there in 1958 was not the most honorable person. And she might have actually taken us to a different place. She didn't want us to see the real house. It's not beyond knowing the woman. It's not beyond the realm of possibility. And so I'm not sure because right now the house is in very bad condition. It's very dangerous. It no longer belongs in the family. when my grandfather, who was the actual owner of the property at the time of his death in 1968, um, asked. So the his my father had already passed away a few years earlier. My father was the oldest son. The other siblings weren't interested in the house. So my uncle in Italy, who was the handling my grandfather's affairs, told me that anybody who wants it can claim it. And I thought about it. At the time, I was married to a man who was not Italian, who was a New York City kid who wouldn't have understood the culture of that little town right off the bat. And he would have had to learn, and he would have had to learn Italian. And there were a lot of considerations. But after we talked it through a little bit, I told my uncle I wanted the property, and I never heard from him again. It turns out that my cousin, who I met, told me that his father also had asked for the property, and our mutual uncle um, sold it out from under us, and at a very modest price. But then in 1980 there was a terrible earthquake in that region, and apparently the property was structurally damaged, as well as it had been neglected by the whoever it was that had purchased it. And so we were unable to go in. And so I can't say that it wasn't uh, the place I saw, but it just seems different, that I had seen in 1958. So I don't know if I can ever get back to solve that mystery a little bit more. I was 12 years old, but I was a real geek. I was already into or nerd. I was already into art and architecture and building things, and I I understood what I was seeing, and I even said to my mother, "This can't be right. There's something we're not seeing here." But she didn't listen to me because I was a kid. So I really don't know. But the point is that the house does exist, and it has the family crest on it, and it's even been noted by the EU as a cultural historic site, as the Casa Baronale, or the baronial house for Montano Antiglia. So that was even though my memories of the house were different, that was a very healing moment, uh, to be out there and seeing that. And also, we went to a friend of my cousin had taken me there. My cousin was unable to go himself, but he had a friend who actually still lives part-time in Montano, and he took me around in the town. And we went up to a little chapel on the other side of town, and there was another big signboard that also mentioned our family. But we did go into the church, and that's the thing. I do know I was in Montano Antiglia when I was 12 years old, because the church was the same. And so, even if that person took us to a fake house for whatever reason she had, but in the church, we used to have a chapel. Apparently, that got damaged in the earthquake, and my grandfather had dedicated an altar. They managed to salvage the altar and move it into the main part of the church. So that was still there, and I saw that. Also, I found that about 400 years ago, no, I think it was more. I think it was actually more recent. My family dedicated a choir stall. Uh, and there's a dedicatory plaque in it. But I think that was done more recently. It's actually in a video about Montano Antiglia, and I have to go back and uh, uh, check the date on that. But it may actually date from the 17th century, because there was a family member who was a priest. He was a priest. He wasn't higher up in the hierarchy in terms of, like, he wasn't a monsignor or a bishop or anything. My grandfather had thought he had been a bishop, but he wasn't. But what he was an apostolic pro-notary, which is a very high position that it can be held by an ordinary priest, but it's an advisory position to the Pope, and there are only 12 of them at any given time. So his name was Tommaso Lettieri, Don Tommaso Lettieri, and he held that position in the 17th century. And that was shortly after the Pope, I don't remember which Pope it was, changed the pro-notary council from, I think there were only 3 or 4 originally. From the beginnings of the church, he changed it to 12, one of the previous popes of maybe 50 years before my, he's not real, in Italian, we don't really call him an ancestor, because as a priest, of course, he didn't have children. He didn't create any progeny, but in English we would call him an ancestor, even though he was an unmarried member of the family. So and he was down the line a little bit from the Barone, whoever he was, whose name was Prospero at that time in 16. I'd have to look at my grandfather's family tree. Early to mid 17th century. So that's how old my family is, at the very least. I think it may go back even further than that, but I don't know. And I didn't get an opportunity to research that. But the thing about, I knew these historical facts pretty well before I went, but what was important was that my mother had some strange attitudes towards the family's history and the property itself in Montano. I don't understand her at all. I don't know what was going through her mind. Sometimes I even wonder why she married my father, because it seems like she really had some disdain for us. But she told me a lot of things that have been proven to not be true from this visit, because my friend Ugo, who took me there, was introducing me to everyone as Barone Agostino's granddaughter. Now, by the time my grandfather came along, those titles were merely honorifics in Italy. They didn't hold any actual legal weight, because they had been granted under the kingdom of the two Sicilies, and when that ceased to exist during the Garibaldi's time, the so-called unification, which I do not support in the least, as by the way, they the titles became meaningless pretty much. Although my family was allowed to hold on to the land, which encompassed, I don't know how much, but thousands of hectares, maybe even a few square kilometers or several square kilometers. I'm not sure, but it was a lot. And when I was there in 1958, the holding was still intact, and I saw the whole, uh, the whole uh, olive orchard. We grew olives and produced olive oil, and it was as far as you could see. That's all been sold off piecemeal, and so there aren't even that many olive trees. I think probably some have been cut. I think probably they've been cut down. I think probably some of them fell during the earthquake. But at any rate, that was a main source of income for the family. But when my friend Ugo was introducing me to various people, all of whom are too young to actually remember my grandfather. Ugo is almost 80. He vaguely remembers my grandfather. He was a kid, but my grandfather, the last time he was there was 60, no, 70 years ago. And he was going to live there again, but the country was still in such bad condition after World War II, even in 1952, that he just couldn't do it. He had become too used to life in America. Uh, and so he went back to America and lived the rest of his life there. But the town has improved a lot, even though most of the young people have had to move out because, like in so much of the South, there's no work. But they have a little tourism industry in the summer because it is a very pretty, scenic area, and it abuts the Cilento National Park. So it's really a shame that a lot of these very nice little towns and villages in southern Italy have been allowed to degenerate the way they have. And I put that squarely on the shoulders of Rome. And we would be better off being a separate country again. But anyway, I was very well received being introduced as the Barone's granddaughter. It sounds funny to American audiences. And this was one of the things my mother always thought was ridiculous, but it's my heritage. It's, you know, how I was formed. And so I don't attempt to wield any power, but it's definitely affected who I am and how I see the world. So um, I was very well received, and that told me right there, then and there, that a lot of the things that my mother said that there had been animosity in the town towards us were absolutely untrue. And I can't begin to tell you how healing that was, because a lot of what my mother caused a very bad emotional trauma in me when I was 14 years old relative to the family history and to the family itself, to the family relationships. She really tried to destroy my relationship with my father's side of the family and almost succeeded. Um, she definitely damaged it. She didn't destroy it, but I was able to recoup some of it after she died. And but one thing I found out that was very interesting, I knew my grandfather had a brother who had been an artist, and he left Italy to go to South America. And I didn't know which brother it was. I found out that it was Vincenzo. Uh, and he was apparently quite an accomplished artist. And it's interesting how a lot of us have inherited that talent. My father was a very talented painter and did other artistic things. He took ordinary, um, not Play Doh. I forgot what this, we had this greasy, putty like clay when we were kids. Some of you might remember it. I don't even remember what it was called. And it was soft. And he made ahead of me when I was about 5 years old. And he also had the idea to paint a mural on my bedroom wall, and he had sketched it out, and he never painted it. I don't know why. But and he did some paintings, and anything he did, the way he did the gardening, he loved the garden. Anything he touched was artistic and beautiful. So I inherited at least a little bit of that, I think. But I found out I through my heritage, I reconnected with a cousin in New Orleans, and her mother was my father's baby sister, and it turns out that both of them are quite artistic, which is something I didn't know because even though this cousin is my age, what my mother did with the family, plus the fact that her family had moved to New Orleans for her father's work, um, I didn't have any contact with her, and I didn't know how she developed as she grew into adulthood. And it turns out that she does ceramics or had done. I don't know if she's doing any right now. I also found out that my cousin Nicola told me that he paints. He does watercolors. He doesn't have a lot of time to do it now. He told me his sister Maria, who is self-taught. She didn't take any training, but she's done some painting. And I believe my aunt Flora, who was the mother of this woman in New Orleans, uh, also was quite artistic in a lot of ways. And so uh, it seems to be a very strong family heritage of art. There seems to be a very strong heritage of family in the family of art and artistic people. There are also a lot of lawyers, which is what my cousin is, and his grandfather was also. And unfortunately, the uncle who stole the house from us was also a lawyer. But there does seem to be a strong legal heritage in the family, and some medical. But my father was a physician and had been a pharmacist. My grandfather was a pharmacist, and my uncle was also a pharmacist. So um, all the pieces have come together now, and the while I am now technically closer to my 77th birthday than to my um, 76th one, although only by a few days. I It's too late for me to reclaim some of the things that I lost from trauma, and like musical ability. I love music. I can sort of sing, but any instrumental ability I had is long gone because I couldn't do it for many, many years. And I tried. And I was never that great a sight reader. I could play better by ear, but I'm just not quite getting it anymore. Although there's a lot of stuff deeply buried. There actually is some theory buried in there somewhere. But I decided to be at peace with it and to, excuse me, sing when I can. Uh, there are certain things I can sing quite nicely, and other things you don't want to hear me at all. Uh, but at least it gives me some joy when I find the right songs to sing. And but now switching to the city of Salerno as a whole, it's a pretty quiet town. It gets tourists, but it's not like Napoli, where there are tourists running all over the place all the time. And there are certain things to see, and it's actually not a bad jumping off place if you want to go to Pompeii and Herculaneum or even Paestum. or and to the if you want to go to the Amalfi Coast for a day, if you don't want to stay in Sorrento or Amalfi itself because of all the tourists and because the terrain in those places is quite difficult. If I had gone to Amalfi, I don't even know if I would have been able to get to the cathedral because if you're familiar with pictures of it, the stairs are unbelievable. So Salerno was, I really liked it. It's really a very beautiful city. A lot of the palazzi from the 16th century, the late Baroque, are still intact. Uh, and the Duomo is absolutely incredible. Uh, St. Matthew the Evangelist is buried there, and his crypt is spectacular. It's large. There are other holy people buried in there too, but it's all inlaid marble, intricate inlay. The whole and frescoes on the ceiling. It's one of the most. I think it's one of the most spectacular places I've been in Italy, and I've been to Venice and Florence, and of course Rome, including the Vatican and other places. And I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like it. Um, because it's very fine detail. A lot of the motifs are quite delicate and small, but this huge space is just covered in them. And there's a very nice little church right near where I stayed called Santissima Annunziata, which is actually considered the second most important church in Salerno after the Duomo. And there's a lot of beautiful marble work in there and also paintings. And I would have liked to have seen more. Uh, I spent a lot of time on the Lungomare because the weather got nice. And even when it was sort of rainy and chilly, it wasn't that terrible. And just being outside was nice. And the beauty of it is really incredible. It's really spectacular. Um, it's definitely a close second to the Bay of Napoli. Uh, we don't have a volcano, but we have, but it really is gorgeous. And I'm of two minds whether to encourage you to go there or not because I really get annoyed by tourists. I don't like to have to deal with them, and which is one reason I didn't go to Sorrento because what's there is the natural beauty, but you see pictures of it, and the street is full of these cheesy tourist shops, and I'm not interested in any of that. I wanted to go to Paestum, but I was having some problems with my knee, which I had injured a couple of weeks before I left, and I thought it was better, but it got inflamed again, probably from the weather. And also, I the bed and breakfast I stayed in was not great, and they had something going on, which I won't go into details about, that create every day I would have a little asthma attack. So, I didn't want to go to Paestum because of getting from the bus station or the train station to the archaeological park was a walk, and I didn't know if I could do it. So, I'm disappointed that I missed out on that. But but the people in Salerno, to me, were the warmest, most wonderful people I've ever met in Italy. And I've never been disappointed by Italians. Well, maybe Romans a little bit. They can be a little bit rough and gruff, although they're not bad people, but their manner can be a little bit. gruff. But the people in Salerno, everywhere I went, people would talk. We would start conversations with me. I mean, random people. I'm not talking about people like in shops or restaurants. They have to be nice to you. Uh, and of course they were. But I'm talking about if I was waiting in a line, somebody would start talking to me, and I'd start talking to them. I One day I just decided for a little break to go to an Indian restaurant, and this young couple sat down next to me, and it turned and she they were speaking English. It turned out she was they were students at the university, graduate students. It turned out she was from Iran, and he was from Colombia, and we just had a lovely conversation. And even though they weren't actually Salernitani, but I guess a little, their cultures are similar, and they were very comfortable in Salerno, and but that's how the Salernitani act too. There's a warmth there, and I just really felt that I had found my roots and that I was home. And I may say more about this. I don't know if I want to burden all my listeners with the trauma part, but maybe I have to think it through a little more, and without going into a lot of excruciating detail, talk about how uh, what I went through at 14 created a post traumatic stress disorder, which of course was not recognized back then. It was in civilians, and it was called battle fatigue or shell shock or various other names in men who had experienced war. But in the last maybe 20 years, it's been it, experts have realized that a lot of what survivors of a trauma have gone through, even as civilians, is the same thing. And now they are recognizing that there's such a thing as complex post traumatic stress disorder, where if you don't address the issues from the initial trauma, you go into a spiral and keep doing stupid things or making poor decisions, and having a less than um, uh, peaceful and a successful. I don't mean in a financial sense, but an emotionally whole life. And this is what happened to me because it happened so young. Basically, a lot of my development stopped at that point. Fortunately, I was a little bit mature for my age at 14. So where my stopping point was more like 16 emotionally, but that's still very young. And it led me to go to the wrong college, which led me to meet my first husband, who was not the right man for me, and being married to him for a number of years led to other poor decisions within the marriage, and all because I didn't really know who I was. I didn't know what my heritage was. I didn't know what my strengths were and what my weaknesses were. I didn't know what needed to be worked on. I didn't know what to put aside, even good things, because I've taken vocational ability tests, I've taken cognitive tests, and I had quite a broad range of things that I could have been competent at doing. But the thing is, I never knew what I wanted to be when I grew up, even when I was 65 years old. So, or so For me, this is how the trauma affected me. By the mercy of God, I never got into drugs. I never got into any kind of criminal or severely immoral behavior. But I made a lot of dumb choices uh, in things I did. And just one example, and then I'm going to go, is when I got divorced, and then that marriage was actually annulled within the church. Um, I tried to create a career. I was only 39 years old. I thought, oh, I can, maybe I can go back to school, or I can get a job and work my way up. Well, that's not who I was. That definitely was not among my talents. If I had been humble enough and realistic enough, I could have gone out and cleaned houses, because I do believe that any honest work is honorable. There's no shame in cleaning somebody else's houses. And I probably could have opened my own cleaning business after a year or two. Uh, you know, but even if I hadn't, I would have had steady work. I would have had a stable income, and I would have been able to get on my feet financially, which I didn't do, which led to another not so great marriage. Although that one lasted over 30 years until he passed away. But anyway, that's my story. It's so much to process. When I was in Montano that one day, I couldn't even process all the emotion. But and I had hoped to go back, but unfortunately, the gentleman was not available to take me back. So I couldn't, but I have enough to process, and we'll just have to see where it goes from here. But now I have a sense of who I am, where I came from, and realistically what I should expect from the next 45 years of my life. Not quite 45. Let's see. If I'm going to be 77 and I'm entitled to 120, how much is that? 43 years, 42, 43 years. I, that's still a lifetime. So I still have some time to get it right. And that's all I'm going to say for now.